Well, is there really such a thing as ex-gay? Is homosexuality a choice? And how does the church minister to those who say, I'm gay and I love Jesus?
It's time for The Line of Fire with your host, activist, author, international speaker, and theologian, Dr. Michael Brown, your voice of moral, cultural, and spiritual revolution. Michael Brown is the director of the Coalition of Conscience and president of Fire School of Ministry. Get into The Line of Fire now by calling 866-34-TRUTH. That's 866-34-TRUTH. Here again is Dr. Michael Brown.
Friends, we are going to have a very important show today. We're not talking about the President's State of the Union address. We're not talking about other things happening in the world. We're talking about something that is touching families, churches around America. The subject of how we as God's people minister to those who identify as gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, who say they're same-sex attracted, who have either been driven away from the church because of a feeling of being condemned and rejected, or who want the church to change its doctrine and beliefs to affirm them in their current practices and desires and attractions. Is change really possible, or is that a cruel thing even to think about? What do you tell an 18-year-old same-sex attracted young man if he's going to follow Jesus? Does that mean he can never marry? He's got to be celibate the rest of his life? Is that what we're telling him? We're going to take these issues up today with Ann Paulk. Ann is the executive director of Restored Hope Network. She's the author of Restoring Sexual Identity, Hope for Women Who Struggle with Same-Sex Attraction. And she's been interviewed in the past in shows like Oprah Winfrey and Good Morning America. And she and her husband, John, were in the news as the poster couple of people who came out of homosexuality. And that was just the beginning of the attack and the controversy. If you yourself are struggling in these areas, if you have a family member who's struggling, if your kid just came out and announced, I'm gay, I'm lesbian, this is the show for you. 866-34-TRUTH, 866-348-7884. We want to be as practical as we can and model the spirit and attitude of Jesus and all of this. Without further ado, my guest, Ann Paulk. Ann, thanks so much for joining us on the broadcast today.
Thank you, Dr. Brown, very much for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, glad to have the conversation with you, Ann. I discovered the controversy about these issues years back. My late brother-in-law was a practicing homosexual before he was saved. When he came to faith, he surrendered his sexuality to the Lord, his whole life to the Lord, and to his surprise, found his desires changing, found himself attracted to women, and was happily married to my sister-in-law before he died of cancer. And I was on some internet forum way back sharing the gospel, and I happened to mention that he had come out of homosexuality and was met with a torrent of criticism. He was never gay. No one ever changes. He's suppressing his desires. Why all the controversy over this? Why is it so hard to believe that someone can actually change? You've been through this. Why the controversy?
I think that's a great question, Michael. And I think the point here is that people who are in the gay lifestyle don't want to believe it's possible for someone to leave the lifestyle. And yet, at the same time, ironically, in gay publications like The Advocate, they will sometimes decry the fact that a woman lost her girlfriend to a guy, or, there's that threat of someone returning to heterosexual proper relating. And so the interesting thing is the outward voice says, no, it's not possible. People are born that way. They cannot change. It's immovable. And that's a very persuasive public message. But internally, even they know that that's not necessarily the case. In fact, some gay people who articulate those views in books and writing, and philosophers essentially, have said, well, some people choose to be gay. Some people, may have had biological or environmental causes or whatever. But science itself shows that is not the case, that there is no proof that someone is actually born gay. So it's fascinating that we've come to believe this.
Yeah, when we come back, let's start with your own story, Ann. Again, the number to call, 866-34-TRUTH. We'll be right back.
It's The Line of Fire with your host, Dr. Michael Brown, your voice of moral, cultural, and spiritual revolution. Here again is Dr. Michael Brown.
It's funny how the media portrays things. They really pushing hard for this gay thing.
Dr. Brown, nobody is celebrating being gay.
Disagree without them making it a hate thing. Really? I say you wrong and you holler hate instantly. But you say we the ones who don't tolerate differences. There's a whole lot of things I could say.
That is the voice of Sizzle, and he is responding to Macklemore's Same Love and the celebration of same-sex Bizzle. Sounds like it's sizzling to me. Bizzle. I'll get that right. Bizzle. Celebrating the truth of Scripture and challenging the same love teaching of Macklemore. 866-34-TRUTH. My guest, Ann Paulk from Restored Hope Network, a woman who came out of lesbianism herself. And here's the question. Is it hateful to say that there's a better way? Is it hateful to say God designed men for women and women for men? Is it hateful to say it's best for a kid to be connected to his or her biological mom and dad? Is it hateful to say that what God lays out in Scripture and his ideal for marriage is right and best for society? And if we tell someone, no, you cannot practice homosexuality, no matter how much you love your partner, you cannot practice homosexuality and follow Jesus at the same time, is that hateful? Is that simply a matter of discipleship for all? My guest, Ann Paulk, Executive Director of Restored Hope Network. I'll tell you about Restored Hope Network, how it came about in a moment. But Ann, let's go through your own journey. When did you first discover that you were same-sex attracted?
I think early on in my life, I became aware of same-sex attraction when I was in junior high and just slightly before that, 4th or 5th grade. I did not exclusively think of myself as gay until I was probably high school. And then when the hormones hit is when I recognized that there was attraction to some girls of my same gender, and the emotional and sexual attraction wasn't as profound towards boys.
Now,
so I recognized that definitely in college and declared myself gay.
All right. When you first started to have these feelings, did it scare you? Did you think, oh no, something's the matter with me? Did you feel I have to fight this or resist this? What was going through your mind?
I think by the time I was in high school, I did. I recognized that I felt very different, and that I hear to be a pretty common phrase. I felt different than my peers, who were preening themselves in the mirror for the guy that they were batting their eyes at in the hallway. And so I was, on the other hand, feeling kind of embarrassed about my femininity. It wasn't adequate. I didn't feel confident as a girl, and there are reasons for that. One was that I was molested when I was 4, and I thought that being a girl, the emotional connection I made, the illogical 4-year-old mind said being a girl is risky, and overnight I became a tomboy, literally.
Wow.
My grandfather died about the same time, and so it seemed like for my parents that I was going through grief over my grandfather passing away, who I'd been very close to. Unfortunately, it was something else, and the outcome of that was eventually to kind of not feel safe around guys, especially if there was a sexual component, and so and also feel kind of not so sure about being a girl. And so I didn't grow up being one of those confident girls who could look in the mirror, fix her hair, curl it, wonder, how can I fix my eyelashes to look better? And, that whole connectivity to my own gender was kind of messed up. It made me vulnerable later on to same-sex attraction.
Now let me ask this.
I was lacking something critical myself, and that was feeling good about being a girl, feeling secure and confident.
Right. And obviously, as a dad who has raised 2 girls, they're now in their mid-30s, and with 2 of our 4 grandkids being girls, I've always been conscious of how important it is to affirm and make them know how beautiful they are and how special they are and feel good about being girls. Obviously, many kids are not raised in that environment, and of course the mom has her specific role in all of this. But Ann, you had your own experience of being molested at the age of 4, and it's a terrifying thing when you talk with people and find out the effects of molestation. Uh, it
Yeah.
I became aware of it. I'm not a professional counselor or anything like that, but hearing testimonies over a period of years from people who had been molested, and whatever the end outcome was, be it in a heterosexual destructive way or a homosexual destructive way or whatever, it was devastating to hear the effects of this, and
Yeah.
especially if it was a person that was trusted or a person of power or authority, a person that was loved. But we commonly hear from gay activists that this whole idea that there's a connection between childhood molestation and homosexuality is a myth. And yet, every counselor I've spoken to, and then pastors who've been counseling for decades, tell me they constantly run into this connection. So,
Yeah.
in your experience on the front lines of ministering to those who are same sex attracted, how common is this that there's some molestation in childhood?
Well, it's tremendously common. And I did a survey back in 2000. It's a while back, but it had 265 women leaving homosexuality or having left. Out of their experiences, over 6 out of 7 had experienced sexual molestation or sexual violation in childhood. That's 6 out of 10 had experienced that, 67%. So almost 7 out of 10. And they say, if you go to any self-defense class, they'll say 1 in 5 women will encounter some kind of sexual attack over their lifetime. But this is talking about childhood, a very primary time when people do develop their sense of well-being, their sense of self, their sense of establishing, their understanding of the world around them and who people are. And I'll tell you what, that's devastating. And then in Stanton Jones' work, he's come to the conclusion that a boy who's been molested is 3 times more likely to deal with homosexuality than a boy who has not been molested. And so that's fascinating. That doesn't mean that everybody who's sexually violated in their childhood will end up developing homosexual attraction, no. But there's a stronger correlation. There's a likelihood of, when you devastate the core of a person, the gender, the security, the sexual security of a child, you violate the principle of adult-to-child relationships. And I'll tell you what, it devastates the child. It devastates them for the rest of their lives.
I met a young woman, a teenager, when I was in church service in Pensacola, Florida. She was blind, but she didn't act like someone who was born blind. She was awkward in her blindness, and something seemed disfigured about her. So after she had responded to an altar call and seemed to be deeply touched, I went over to talk to her to find out what was going on in her life. And she explained that she and her boyfriend were in such emotional pain that they decided to make a pact to have someone kill them. They actually convinced another one of their teenage friends to shoot them both in the head. And the boyfriend was killed. She survived and was blinded, if you can imagine this. And I asked what was the cause of the pain, what started things, and it was sexual molestation over a period of time by someone close to her as she was growing up. And it was it was shocking. I mean, here she is blind, her boyfriend dead, and someone else, of course, going to jail for complicity in this. And in this case, it had nothing to do with homosexuality, but people will say, okay, yeah, we understand that. We see how it could mess with you. Well, then obviously, as someone is coming into their own identity, sexual identity, these other things, of course it can affect attractions and desires. And to deny that environment affects someone's sexuality is to be really in complete denial. There's no reason to question it, is it?
No, there is no reason. I believe that it would be way beyond naivety to believe that there's no impact. It would be absolute and utter, bury your head in the sand and pretend that life doesn't exist choices. I mean, really, does someone's choice impact you? If the surgeon takes off the wrong leg, does it make a difference in your life, or do you just go on and pretend the leg's there? Clearly, there's an impact. It's that way on the emotional part, on the internal, and the inner person. And the beautiful thing is, is that Jesus Christ can comfort the one who's been violated, can produce some new fruit out of pain that was meant to destroy and harm. And that fruit being, he's the only person I know that can take ashes and make a crown. He's the only person I know that can take a destroyed life and make them a treasure. And that is exactly the character of the God I serve and the God you serve. He is the most astonishing person I've ever met, full of mercy and authority. And his justice is perfect. He metes it out with kindness and mercy. And,
yes, he does. And he expresses it. He expresses it through the cross. And we come back, let's find out how Jesus intervened in your life. And then let's begin by giving our listeners resources, places they can go for help.
Oh, God of burning, cleansing flame, send the fire.
It's The Line of Fire with your host, Dr. Michael Brown. Get into The Line of Fire now by calling 866-34-TRUTH. Here again is Dr. Michael Brown.
Jesus really changes us, not just our behavior, but to the core of our being. And even if our desires don't change, when we recognize what's right in his sight, then we do what's right in his sight with his help and grace. I was reading a book written by a pastor in England who is living a holy celibate life, still finds himself same-sex attracted, though, but denies it and is living a holy life before the Lord. By denies it, I mean he does not give place to it. And he said, people say to him, oh, it must be so hard for you. He said, no, Jesus requires all of us to give everything, and he's more than enough for all of us. I believe that as he continues to walk in the Lord, he can experience total change even in the depth of his desires. But rather than defining himself by his desires and attractions, he's defining himself by being a disciple of Jesus. My guest, Ann Paulk, author of Restoring Sexual Identity, Hope for Women Who Struggle with Same-Sex Attraction, and executive director of the Restored Hope Network, which is an interdenominational membership governed, interdenominational membership governed network dedicated to restoring hope to those broken by sexual and relational sin. RestoredHopeNetwork.org. RestoredHopeNetwork.org. So, Ann, you came out as lesbian in college. Did you feel better about life at that point? Did you feel better about yourself? Was it a period of freedom for you, or was it a period of greater conflict?
You know, for me, it was a period of greater conflict. It was not that release that I've heard some people experience when they walked in the bar and they met a lot of people just like them. I met a lot of people just like me, but I somehow felt nervous. I felt excited, but it wasn't the kind that makes you feel at peace. In fact, that became more and more difficult to find any sense of peace. And one time I was seeking how to talk to my parents about, hey, I'm gay, and how to disclose that to them. And I went to this meeting that was full of people and was interviewing some parents. They were interviewing parents about how to do that and how the parents responded and everything else. And it was by a group kind of like PFLAG, where they're supportive of homosexuality. And so here were these parents saying how wonderful it was. And as I began to interact, this thought flooded my head, just out of the blue. It certainly did not fit in this room anywhere. And it didn't, or the origin wasn't from me, but the point was, Ann, you're not going to find the love you're looking for here. And I was like, that was like a shot from heaven. It was a little ray of light, but it could have been as far as big of a lightning bolt of understanding approached me. And I knew that voice was telling me the truth. I just knew it down deep in my soul, as much as I didn't want to hear it, that I knew that I wouldn't find what I was looking for there.
And did you have
culture in the lifestyle?
Did you have Christian upbringing? Did you have Christian upbringing at this point?
You know, I did. I grew up in a Presbyterian church. It was just phenomenal. I don't remember ever hearing about the gospel. I don't remember hearing about salvation or sin or redemption. None of that. It was all these pretty easy stories about, I walked down the street the other day and the grocer did A, B, and C, and then I responded nicely by doing this. Kind of superfluous, irrelevant stories for me. and how to be a nice guy or a nice gal. And so I grew up without understanding any of this. And when I was away at college, I figured, well, God doesn't seem very real to me, so I'm just going to toss him out and go ahead and pursue the lesbian life. That was my purpose my first year in college. And my life became dramatically worse as a result of that. But amazingly, while it was becoming worse and worse, this thought, unwanted, undesired, and unsought after, pierced my mind, and I knew it was telling me the truth. So I took off and ran off to the library on a Friday night at a college, which, no one's there at a party school. And I'll tell you what, God and I had a talk. I said, whoever the real God is, I want to know you. And I don't want to know anything else that gets in the way, no fake versions of this. Who the real God is, I want to know, and hopefully you're not Christian, because I don't want to give up homosexuality, even though you just said this to me. So then I put out what I didn't realize at the time was a fleece. I put out whoever you really are, reveal yourself to me by doing A, B, C, and D. And wouldn't you know, in 2 weeks' time, all those things had happened.
Really?
And wouldn't you know, the person he connected me with was someone who struggled with homosexuality in her own life and was a Christian and devoted to Christ. And I thought, oh my, this is not the answer I wanted. And I promptly fell in love with the girl. So it was just a messy start in my relationship with God, but he was clearly at work and doing things that were completely unexpected at every turn.
All right. Now, I'm going to jump ahead, and then I do want to get to some calls as well.
Sure.
But simple question. We've got a lot of time to talk. I've got some clips I want to play for you to respond to. I want to talk about what happened with your husband, John. But are you simply fighting a good fight to say no to your lifelong same-sex attraction, or did you actually experience a change at the core of your being?
I experienced a reuniting with my original purpose. I'll put it that way. My purpose is to obey Christ and to live according to his way. Now, does that mean I'm white-knuckling it? No, I'm not. But it took me a while to understand some of the roots and causes of what had drawn me to homosexuality and that as a potential comfort in the first place. It was a false sense of trying to gain intimacy the wrong way. Mm-hmm. And so when I understood all these principles and put to work proper principles like how to develop real girlfriends, how to develop friendships and be a good friend to someone else, I have thrived as a woman of God. And as those things happened and I realized I was another woman amongst women, I actually enjoyed being a woman and felt the good fruits of doing that. And that's when my attractional part really began to change. It was years in the making, but I'll tell you what, once I felt like another one of this body of women, I thought, what's the big deal about them anyway? Guys are really different. That's when my attractions began to change.
Fascinating. All right, I'm going to jump in here. I want to hear the rest of your story. If you have a question, your own life, family member, you need to call in anonymously, that's fine. 866-34-TRUTH. Friends, we are getting requests from different nations, people asking for a queer thing happen to America. 700-page book I wrote, carefully researched. Those of you who were surprised to see Disney celebrating a same-sex couple on a Good Luck Charlie show for children, you wouldn't have been surprised if you had read A Queer Thing Happened to America. Those of you who are surprised with the changes in our country wouldn't be surprised if you've read this. It's a 700-page book, hardcover with postage, about a $35 value. Yours today for your gift of any size. Help us as we're on the front lines of this issue as well. And the book deals with the question of ex-gay too. Call right now, 1-800-278-9978. 1-800-278-9978. Stand with us as we are on the front lines. We want to bless you with this book, 1-800-278-9978.
It's The Line of Fire with your host, activist, author, international speaker, and theologian, Dr. Michael Brown. your voice of moral, cultural, and spiritual revolution. Get into the line of fire now by calling 866-34-TRUTH. Here again is Dr. Michael Brown.
It's funny how the media portrays things. They really pushing hard for this gay thing. And it's so wicked how they manipulate things. Can't even disagree without them making it a hate thing. I say you wrong and you holler hate instantly. But you say we the ones who don't tolerate differences.
Very, very true. The words of Bizzle, his response to Macklemore's Same Love. My guest, Ann Paulk from the Restored Hope Network. She's executive director. Many of you heard, Exodus, this was this network of ministries working together to help people with same-sex attraction, and Exodus collapsed, and the head of Exodus said no one really changes. Well, it's a shame that Exodus did fold, but because Exodus had lost its vision and purpose in its senior leadership, it's actually best that something new was raised up. God is never lacking. There are always alternatives in the Lord. And before Exodus had collapsed, some of the key ministries involved with it had already started Restored Hope Network. They had left Exodus and started Restored Hope Network. So get the word out. There is a network of ministries across the country, and it is growing with resources to help those with unwanted same-sex attraction. RestoredHopeNetwork.org. My guest, Ann Paulk, who is Executive Director of Restored Hope Network. A bunch of other questions I want to get to, and even a little bit more in your own journey. But let's take some calls first. We always get calls from people wanting to know what happens. My son's declared he's gay. My husband's struggling with same-sex attraction. I've got a child confused about gender. So let's take some calls. Helen in Boston, thanks for calling the Line of Fire. You're on with Ann Paulk.
Hi. Hello? Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
We can hear you. Thank you.
Hi. It's a very timely thing that you're on the radio today. I actually was going to leave before 2 o'clock, and I'm glad I didn't leave the house and I could hear you talking. I have a 16-year-old son. He is a great kid. He's smart. He's funny. He's always been sensitive to a lot of things, although he's never been, effeminate or anything like that. But he's always liked music and dancing. And anyway, about a year last spring, he told us that his girlfriend, which was like his third or fourth girl that he was dating, was pansexual, which I'd never heard of before. I had to look it up, and a lot of other people since then also. And she would be attending the Gay-Straight Alliance at his high school. And those meetings, he would go to those meetings too. And then he was more and more active in it. And at that time I said, "Hi, do you think that you are gay or homosexual?" Or I don't even remember how I asked it. And he kind of smirked and he said, "Well, I think I'm too young to make that decision," which wasn't the answer I was looking for. And he still continues to attend. Anyway, so I want to love my son, but I know this is also a process a lot of people go through who ultimately define as heterosexual. Anyway, what can you help me there in terms of how can I support my son? I keep thinking of the Jeremiah I know the plans I have for you, and that verse.
Right.
Yeah, and tell you what, let me just jump in for a second because we've just got 30 seconds before the break. So when we come back, Ann is going to go straight to your question, Helen. But let me just say this quickly to everyone listening. If kids are surveyed when they're 14, 15 years old about same-sex attraction, especially their environment they're in today, a decent percentage, could be 25 or 30%, will say, "I think I'm same-sex attracted." You survey those same kids 5 years later, it may be a tenth of that. So let's put things in perspective as well. But when we come back, Ann is going to answer your question, Helen, about how to deal with this with your 16-year-old son struggling with his sexual identity.
It's fire we want, for fire we plead. Send the fire.
It's The Line of Fire with your host, Dr. Michael Brown. Get into The Line of Fire now by calling 866-34-TRUTH. Here again is Dr. Michael Brown.
We're talking about the issue of same-sex attraction, those who identify as gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender. What's the role of the church in this? What should our response be as parents, as friends? How do we deal with these things in our own lives? My guest, Ann Paulk, who came out of a lesbian lifestyle and now leads Restored Hope Network. You can find out more by going to restoredhopenetwork.org. And we've got on the phone with Ann Helen from Boston, who's been sharing about struggles with her own 16-year-old son. So, Ann, you and Helen, go ahead.
Hello.
Well, Helen, you were mentioning that you have a 16-year-old son. He's a great kid, smart, and he's capable. And he's sensitive and likes art, and there's no problem with that. Of course, that's irrelevant, really, to gender identity. Some of the best cooks and sculptors and artists have been heterosexual men. You know, that's kind of irrelevant to the thing. But in our current culture, what the Gay-Straight Alliance is for is not for gay people and straight people to make friendships. It's for a purpose of essentially propagandizing the gay message. And it's become an alliance that's really limitless in defining sexuality. It has nothing to do with Christian definitions or interest in that. In fact, that would be not welcome, I'm sure, to those discussions. But his girlfriend's defining herself as pansexual, which means gender doesn't matter.
Right.
It also comes from the origin, of course, of all sexualities open to whatever, heterosexual, homosexual, whatever. So it's just that this time in this season of the culture, the youth do not want to define themselves by labels. The problem is when you have no labels, when you have no limits, you have no limits. You really, and that's what's being enculturated. It's like in a petri dish, and you put this mixture in, and you're going to grow something, and what you grow, it will impact the individuals who hang around it. And so the Petri dish, meaning the Gay-Straight Alliance, will develop alternate sexuality for anyone who attends it. That's the purpose of the group. They may say something else, but that is indeed seems to be the outcome that is sought after. So I don't believe that's probably a good influence on him. You know, the thing about Scripture is it's very smart.
I'm sure it's not. I just don't know what to do. I mean, do I say, okay, you can't go to this anymore? I mean, he does have other friends. He moves in different circles. But do I say, okay, you cannot attend this anymore?
Well, I don't think that generally works very well with any of us.
Right.
It's like, okay, you're on a diet today. Someone else tells you, and what's the first thing you want to do is go eat, right?
Yeah.
So just on a practical, psychological level, I think the best thing to do that's always worked for me with my kids is let's talk about it. I know you're probably not going to like this, but we actually need to sit down and have a good discussion. What is actually occurring in you as being a part of this? How have you changed since being a part of it? Is that a good influence or not? What happens in your life when you're around kids that are walking securely with the Lord, when you're hanging with a different environment? Our environments do impact us. You know, Proverbs says, when you walk with the wise, you will be wise. And what he's doing is he's choosing to walk and spend his time with people who are not walking wisely. They're deliberately rebelling from God's plans, and you know that's his choice. But I would sit down and talk with him and appeal to him and persuade him, and just have him think it through, really, and let's discuss this again. We need to talk about this, son, because I don't approve of investing your time in this way if it's leading in this particular direction, and I see you going somewhere. And I think I would sit down with.
Are there resources? Are there practical resources that you would recommend that Helen could get into her hands or into her son's hands?
Absolutely. In fact, we have a recommended books resource guide on our website. If you go up to resources on the top, we have recommended books. We have audio tapes. We have videos that you could watch. We have local ministries that would be grateful to come alongside and help you. I mean, that's what they're there for. There are people like me who have left the life, and who some who have been, impacted by someone else who's left the life, and they honestly are there to support families going through the trials that you're going through. And so I would recommend that you look on our Find Help, click on Find Help on the menu, and see what's available in your area. And Helen, even if we don't have anything in Boston right now, but honestly, we'll be developing pilot ministries over the years, in the next couple of years, and we'll see about where the interests lie and things like that, and move ahead in developing those. But until then, we have parents who are willing to do Skype counseling and people that know what it's like to be in your shoes. So that's the good thing. There are plenty of resources.
All right, so Helen, restoredhopenetwork.org. Click on Find Help or on the resources. And also remember, there's nothing more powerful than the prayers of a mother. And as you really look to the Lord and seek God, I've heard the most remarkable testimonies of people who are in the deepest pit, even in a self-destructive mode of every kind, with drugs or alcohol or violence or prison, and they got delivered and saved and got right with God. And when they testified, they'd say, Mama kept praying. Those words I'll never forget hearing. And the key thing is your son really comes into a vibrant relationship with the Lord. But Helen, thanks for calling. And Helen speaks for many of you. Many of you haven't called, but you're sitting there nodding, saying that's my exact situation. RestoredHopeNetwork.org. And whatever you can do to stand with them, that would be wonderful, because this really stretches you. Thank you for the call. Let's go to Kay, also in Boston. Hey, Ann, for whatever it's worth, 3 straight calls from Boston. And we get calls, of course, from all over the nation. So keep Boston on your map there. Yes, Kay, welcome to the Line of Fire.
Hi. I'm so glad to be able to connect with you guys. I thank God for the testimonies that have been shared with the sister that's on with you today. I, too, I grew up in the church after a divorce, kind of went back into the world, into the lifestyle. I think through the devastation of my divorce, unlike many others that may have gone into the life trying to figure out, their preference, their gender preference, what have you, I actually walked in knowing that this is not the way of the Lord. But thank God that He's given me total deliverance. But what I struggle with now is my 16-year-old. She is at a crossroads where she's wondering if she does or she doesn't, if she is or isn't attracted to women. And she's struggling with these feelings. She actually came to me in tears. She gave her life to the Lord some years ago. So she knows right from wrong. But what do you do with these situations? Do I need to put her in therapy? I know, just like you mentioned earlier, just mentioned about the prayers. The prayers of the righteous do avail much. And I am definitely a woman of faith and a praying mom. And I'm continuously praying over her. But at the same time, too, do you suggest that I get her connected to groups like Restored Hope? Or is it really not at that point? And I think, Michael, you had mentioned just to Helen, the other caller from Boston, that, even at the age 14, 15, 16, they're somewhat unsure, but 10% as they get older don't actually go over into that lifestyle. So what do you do in situations like this?
Well, first I think to myself, part of attraction isn't necessarily sexual. Part of it is admiration. And so if she's looking at, gosh, I admire so-and-so, and I feel strong emotional feelings and pull towards that, that doesn't mean it's sexual. Secondly, we live in a culture now that is sexually hedonistic, essentially. We're hedonists. We're lovers of pleasure and lovers of self. We cultivate it. It's in the news all the time. Some girls always kissing somebody else, and they're actually heterosexual, and yet they're acting out part in a movie, or in a show. And so it is confusing to a child who's 16, who doesn't yet have the grounding of knowing who they are and where they want to go. And I think we can blame part of that on the disaster that our culture is making of sexuality. And yet, really, the responsibility of teaching sexuality resides on us as parents and on the church, and even talking about it. We've avoided these topics, and so I'm so thrilled to be on the show with Dr. Brown. He's a tremendous help to the church, to the body at large, and I think our youth groups, they're struggling with this routinely. Why? Because they see Katy Perry do whatever she's going to do. They see Madonna. They see Britney Spears.
And they watch Glee among
they watch Glee.
Other shows.
Every single show has a gay positive character. Yeah.
All right, let's come back and talk about this for a moment. Church youth groups, the influence, what can they do? Okay, thanks for calling again, restoredhopenetwork.org.
Oh, God of burning, cleansing flame, send the fire.
It's The Line of Fire with your host, Dr. Michael Brown, your voice of moral, cultural, and spiritual revolution. Here again is Dr. Michael Brown.
Thanks for joining us, friends, on The Line of Fire, 866-34-TRUTH. We regularly get calls from people unsolicited. They are not professionals. They're not working for ministries. When I say professionals, I mean in terms of their testimony. They are simply believers, moms, dads, folks out in the workplace who say that Jesus transformed them, that they used to be homosexual and they no longer are. Many will talk about pain that they lived with and transformation that came through the gospel. My guest, Ann Paulk, Executive Director of RestoredHopeNetwork.org. And let's touch on a couple of very controversial things, but we'll do it briefly, okay? The end of Exodus International, I told my listeners, and I wrote about it as well, that ultimately it was a positive thing because Exodus lost its vision and mission and the very reason that it was raised up by God. And God then raised up Restored Hope Network to fill the gap, to fill the void. And yet it's played out before the media as further proof that you're born gay, you can't change, and this is a complete failure. What's your take on what happened with Exodus and the raising up of Restored Hope Network?
Well, I would agree with you. I think that there were three potential reasons why the demise happened, but I think the most important one is the theological position that the head of Exodus took and asserted, and that was essentially there was a theological implosion. It couldn't stand based upon that. I liken it to a person who comes up to a tree that's well established and you inject it with poison on both sides of the tree, the root system. One saying, you don't need to change to enter the kingdom of heaven. You don't need to repent. You don't have to change at all. There's no need. And secondly, that no one can. You know, it's like 1.1%, is that what he said, could change from homosexuality. And yet I know hundreds, and I just personally know hundreds of people who have had degrees of change of their attractional aspects, but they've had lifestyle changes where they're actually living the life and obeying Christ with their lives and finding the joy and peace and freedom that comes along with that. And that was not represented. And so, therefore, essentially that tree had to go.
Yep.
And I saw it 1.5 years, 2 years prior. I kept giving the benefit of the doubt, and then I recognized, no, this is really where it's going, and it's coming down. So we recognize with joy that God raised us up to fill in the gap, to pick up the original mission, and to move along with it. And that's His mission. It's His purpose. We're just thrilled to be a part of it and to carry on the good work that He does in people's lives. It's His mission.
And of course your testimony has been steady through these many years. And you, again, as you said,
Yes.
know personally hundreds and hundreds who've experienced either different degrees of change in their sexual romantic attraction, some total radical change, some minor change, but all surrendered to the Lord and enjoying a blessed life in Jesus and saying, yes, God's ways are better. Hey, and we have a whole other hour. In that hour, I want to talk briefly about what happened with your husband, John, because, again, that's another situation that's used to discredit the idea of ex-gay. I want to play some clips from some popular media out there denying that people change. You can respond to those as well. And I've got a bunch of calls I want to get to, but just 2 minutes or less, what would you say to youth leaders? Do they need to engage this subject of homosexuality with young people in the church, say teenagers for sure?
They definitely, without any question, need to address it with the teenagers. Kids are finding more information on iPhones, iPads, Android devices. They know more about sexuality than we did as kids and even as young adults. And here they are, 16, and not knowing what to do about it. They honestly need some direction. They need some coaching. They need some adequate care and help. And if we're shy about handling it, we're leaving only the world to educate them on the topic that's so primary, that God has so much to say about the sexual intimacy and connection that he designed between a man and woman. Sex outside of those bounds can be quite destructive and is destructive. And so if we don't talk about it, we leave it open to only the influence that is talking about it. And we just need to engage our teens with it. It's uncomfortable, perhaps, but you know what? We can make a difference in the lives of these kids as they grow up into young adults and become older adults and live throughout their lives. They'll remember this time that we stood alongside of them or did not.
Absolutely. And if a kid is struggling and saying, I'm attracted to the same sex, all the more does the youth leader and the other kids just need to make that kid feel at home and reach out to them so that they know if you're struggling, if you're questioning, this is the place to be, not the Gay Straight Alliance, right, and not the, hanging out with others that are going to push you in a different direction. So if folks go to Restored Hope Network and click on Find Help or Resources, they'll be able to find resources and recommendations, be it for parents, be it for people struggling, be it for young people. Those are all there on the website, correct?
That is right. And there's actually one focused online that if there's not a ministry in your area, there's a particularly great resource for youth called Reach Truth. And reachtruth.com was designed for youth as they discover and put together God's view of sexuality and gender and talking through these things and wrestling through them and coming to conclusions that are well put for their future and their well-being. So reachtruth.com is another one. It's on our website on the Find Help map. If you don't see something in your area, just go over to the right, and right below there it has takingbackground.com, and reachtruth.com is another internet resource that we have available.
All right, wonderful. Hannah and I are going to continue our conversation the next hour. You can keep listening on AskDrBrown.org or just go later in the day to our website. Everyone on hold, please stay there. I want to get to your calls early in the next hour. Friends, got email from India the other day wanting to translate part of A Queer Thing Happened to America because of things happening there. Got requests for the book from leaders in another Asian country and then a Latin American country, and then, of course, in an ongoing way in America. This book remains essential reading. I just saw someone posted a review of A Queer Thing Happened to America today saying this book must get to the leaders of Congress here in America. So I want to get this into your hands. It was 6 years of writing and research, 1,500 endnotes, but written in a way anyone can understand. And even if you're not a big reader, read the chapter on what's happening in the children's schools. Read the chapter on the rewriting of the Bible. Read the chapter on the assault of religious freedoms. Read the chapter on ex-gay. So the book with postage about a $35 value, but it's yours for your gift of any size. Stand with us and help those that can help with more. We'll help those who have less. Give us a call, 1-800-278-9978. 1-800-278-9978. One more time, that's 1-800-278-9978. My bottom line today, it really is true. People from every background and sexual attraction, such were some of you, but Jesus changed you. Well, is there really such a thing as ex-gay? Is homosexuality a choice? And how does the church minister to those who say, I'm gay and I love Jesus?
It's time for The Line of Fire with your host, activist, author, international speaker, and theologian, Dr. Michael Brown, your voice of moral, cultural, and spiritual revolution. Michael Brown is the director of the Coalition of Conscience and president of Fire School of Ministry. Get into The Line of Fire now by calling 866-34-TRUTH. That's 866-34-TRUTH. Here again is Dr. Michael Brown.
Thanks, friends, for joining us today on the broadcast. My guest, Ann Paulk, she's been on with me the last hour and is joining me again for this second hour. She is the executive director of Restored Hope Network. Maybe some of you remember in the late 90s, front cover, Newsweek magazine, Gay for Life, ? There's a couple, John and Ann Paulk, and challenging the idea that you're born this way and you can't change. You may have seen her back then or in the early 2000s on Oprah Winfrey or Good Morning America or some of these other shows, 700 Club. People magazine wrote about her. She's the author of Restoring Sexual Identity, Hope for Women Who Struggle with Same-Sex Attraction. And of course, we're told now that this is cruel, that this is hateful, that to say that someone can change is like saying you can go from being left-handed to right-handed, that all you're going to do is suppress who you really are. And Ann says that she found freedom and wholeness in Jesus, and discovering who she was as a woman was the key to other changes taking place. We want to help you with your practical questions. We'll be getting to calls shortly, 866-34-TRUTH if you'd like to call. That's 866-348-7884. And as we have been talking about this issue in the first hour, and you talked about your own journey, you mentioned that it wasn't simply a matter of dealing with the desires, but there are deeper things about womanhood going back to when you were abused as a 4-year-old and when being female, being a girl seemed dangerous to you. I was reading a report, obviously, trying to make things look bad from China about Chinese men, and they're going through, quote, therapy, and they'll look at pictures, pornographic pictures of same-sex activity, and then if it stimulates them, they get a shock, and obviously it's a ridiculous treatment. It's nothing that we advocate. But you're saying that there are much deeper issues than just the attraction, and that just dealing with the attraction is not the right approach. Am I understanding you correctly?
You are indeed understanding me correctly. In fact, Exodus in the old days and throughout its history never used any practice like they're using, if that's the case in China. That was always an accusation that was not founded in reality. So, unfortunately, the leadership way back when never dealt with it. But, yes, I'm exactly saying that there are deeper roots that produce the fruit of attraction towards others, and it's based on gender insecurity, quite honestly, and feel the sense of well-being. When people feel better about themselves, they are less attracted to the members of their same gender, believe it or not. And so even a therapist who was not attempting to help people leave lesbianism found that to be true. Elaine Siegel, a Jewish therapist who was counseling some lesbian couples that were going through difficulties, what she found was those who felt better about themselves resolved their sexual desire. It was interesting towards the same gender. I mean, it wasn't a desired outcome on her part, but she discovered that. And honestly, I found it to be true. I found it to be true that when someone essentially recognizes the beauty of what God has created and understands their value and their significance and their the fact that they are indeed a daughter of the King or a son of the King of Kings, then they grasp something that's only homosexuality takes away from. And so it's lessened when you actually feel great about and understand your value and your position in Christ.
Yeah, and being in Jesus, when there's no male or female, it means distinctions, caste system, but there is maleness and femaleness ordained by God. Back with your calls.
It's The Line of Fire with your host, Dr. Michael Brown. Get into the Line of Fire now by calling 866-34-TRUTH. Here again is Dr. Michael Brown.
When God laid on my heart to get involved in these issues having to do with homosexuality and same-sex attraction, because it's not my own background and it's not something I was particularly burdened with in ministry, it came when I was concerned about the effects of gay activism on society. And God laid on my heart, reach out and resist. Reach out to the people with compassion. So as I began to read their stories and hear the stories of those that said they tried to change and couldn't, especially those who were trying to follow Jesus and wrestling with these things, I agonized. Sometimes I'd have to put the book down and get on my knees and pray and weep. At the same time, I recognized that gay activism was having a destructive effect on our society. So my burden for individuals has only grown over the years. And I constantly look for opportunities to share the gospel with those who identify as gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, and to hear their stories, to let them tell me their stories so I can hear and understand better. And with that, I know there is hope in the gospel. First, for salvation that we all need, forgiveness of sins that we all need, new life in Jesus that we all need, but even change to the core of our being. My guest, Ann Paulk, the director of Restored Hope Network. And let's take some calls and then get back to more personal and practical questions as well. One more call from Boston. Diane in Boston, thanks for calling the Line of Fire.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear, Diane.
Okay. I'm just calling. You basically covered a lot of stuff that I was going to say, but I think that I'm going to say how I feel in America as parents. We have to be very careful how we handle our young offspring. Because when they step out of their home in nursery school, kindergarten, and getting into on their own, they're going to be exposed to a lot of things. And I say this because I've seen and experienced children are very vulnerable when they're small, and they have to have identity somewhat. I would say a really good identity when they're stepping out of the home. And not only that, how we, speak, what we let our children see on TV, what their surroundings are, and also having enough closeness to our child that we're aware if there's any kind of behavior pattern, and the fact that even as young child, that child can talk to mommy and daddy about anything. And we also need to be careful how we show affection. Kids are vulnerable, and you show innocently affection, but you have to really, because they're, like I said, they're vulnerable.
All right, so let's just jump in.
That's important.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Diane, for sharing all that. I appreciate it. And in your experience with the many people you've counseled and whose stories you heard, how important is the parental relationship with kids in terms of sexual development? That's first question. Second question, if a kid tells mom and dad that they're identifying as homosexual, should the parents feel guilty? Does that mean they did something wrong? So those two questions for you. Thank you, Diane.
Sure. Well, first of all, it's vital that they have strong and solid relationships with their mother and father. The dad imparts to a boy a sense of the desire to become a man like him. He models what's it like to be a man. And if there is not a dad present, then an uncle or another man in the family setting, maybe, whoever is available, models that being a man is a good thing, and that there's some fun aspects about it, and that it's a unique gender identity. It's unique. It's not It's not the same as being a girl, and that's pretty cool. In fact, my boys, I've got 3 of them. When I say, girls are pretty awesome, our girls are better than boys, I just like to bait them a little bit. They're, from 11 to 17 years old, so the younger one will respond and say, "Oh, Mom, boys are better." And it's this dynamic that they really enjoy being a guy that I just love. They're just totally secure. Now, as a parent, I can either help that or hinder that. I can give them the sense that being a guy or being a man is a bad thing as a mother. That can sometimes pour out of maybe what she's experienced from men in her life. If she's been abused or molested and not dealt with it, that may be transmitted to her children, that guys are bad, can come across in different ways, subtly, over time in the history of the child's life, right? And that's not a good message for a little boy to get. Some women are so hostile towards men that they actually may be heterosexual, but it might be damaging to their son. That's not always the case, and rarely is it, but that child might develop into dealing with transgender issues later on, that they see that their being a boy is a bad thing. It's not just desirable to connect with other boys, but I've got to get rid of my boy characteristics. So it matters a lot how the parents interact with their child and what they think about gender, what they think the value, and it's treasured, honestly. I feel that being a girl is such a beautiful thing, and yet the boys are just, tremendous. Love them to death, and I love being their mom. Now, men, on the other hand, what generally ends up happening, and this is fairly common, so common it's become, a generalized principle, is that a boy who seriously struggles with homosexuality often feels very disconnected with his dad. Does that mean the dad is a bad guy? No. It may just mean that there's not a good connection going on, that he needs to work on his relationship with his son. And that is so vital for a father and a son, because the father models what it's like to be a man. And so the character of the father matters a lot too. So these things are not separated. They're very intimate. They're very connected. And what you display in your actions is so much more important than what you say, although words are important as well.
All right, well, what about the idea then when a child says, the child comes out and says, I'm Dad, I want you to know, Mom, I want you to know I'm gay. I've really discovered my identity. How should parents feel? Should they feel, I must have done something wrong, I've obviously failed? Or is that the absolute wrong reaction?
Well, I don't think there is a wrong or right with feelings. I think that they're just going to happen. And most parents are going to feel, what did I do wrong if my child chooses drugs or alcohol or any number of things, including same-gender sexual attraction and acting out on that. So a parent is probably going to feel that anyway, regardless. Now, the early on things, you can't back up time and go, gosh, I could have done that better. Of course, we all could have done things better. I'm a parent. I know. When my kids are grown, I can't back up time and fix something that I lost my temper on unfairly with one of my sons when it was the other person's fault. I mean, you can't back up time. So there's a balance of how do you deal with this? Well, you have to be humble to say, gosh, I might have blown it at times, and it might have impacted you negatively, and what did you take from that? You can't see inside your child's mind or heart, and they often don't know what motivates them. So really you have to be very careful not to overly blame yourself, because that is not going to be helpful. What matters is if something comes up and your child wants to talk and they say, Mom, I wish that this had been done differently, or Dad, I wish, that you go, well, you got a point there. I'm really sorry. And that, or if it's not valid, to be honest of, I did the best I could, or I would have liked to have done differently there, or I'm so sorry, I didn't mean that to happen at all. You took that wrong, and I had no chance to correct it. So all of those things can be in play for a parent. Should they feel bad? They're probably going to feel bad, whether they should or not. And it can't fix your child for feeling bad, so that's fixing isn't going to happen anyway. What we need to see is someone getting to the point where they recognize the individual's choice. It's now with an adult child their choice of what to do about the attractions, whether they'll seek help or not. And then if they begin to work through things and they see things that could have been done differently in their upbringing, then they may bring it to you, and at that point you can do something about it. You can say, I'm really sorry, or I didn't do that, or whatever it is as a parent that you might respond to.
And I'm speaking with Ann Paulk, restoredhopenetwork.org. Go there, find out about the resources there, find out about the ministries that may exist in your city or state. Al, April, Diane, Stephanie, we're going to get your calls when we come back. Let me just say this. Parents, if you're believers, your kid knows you're a believer, and they, quote, come out, say, look, you know what we believe, you know our convictions, but then just love on them, love on them, love on them, and make them know you are there to be involved in their lives.
Give us strength to always do what's right.
It's The Line of Fire with your host, Dr. Michael Brown, your voice of moral, cultural, and spiritual revolution. Here again is Dr. Michael Brown.
God loves you no matter what you struggle with. At least struggle, though. Don't just give up and quit. Forget how you were born. We were all born in sin, but Christ died for your sin. You can be born again. We were all born in sin, but Christ died so...
The voice of Bizzle responding to Macklemore's Same Love. Of course, the Grammy Awards on Sunday night celebrated the marriages of 33 couples, including same-sex couples, as Macklemore and Madonna sang Same Love. For my article on that, go to AskDrBrown.org and click on latest article. Here's an article from Brandon Ambrosino. I wasn't born this way. I choose to be gay. LGBT message in Same Love. So Brandon Ambrosino is saying, listen, we don't have to go with this mentality that we're born this way and we can't change. Now, I understand that most people who have same-sex attraction did not consciously choose those. The vast majority didn't consciously make a choice, say, I'm going to be this way. And yet he's saying, look, by the logic of the song Same Love, none of us has any control over our sexual identities. We are what we are, and there's not a blank thing we can do about that, so let's just stop trying to change. He says that's wrong. It's time for the LGBT community to stop fearing the word choice and to reclaim the dignity of sexual autonomy. How interesting. And the wife of the mayor of New York, he's so liberal people call him the communist mayor of New York, she is a former lesbian. What do you know? 866-34-TRUTH, my guest, Ann Paulk, Executive Director of Restored Hope Network. That's restoredhopenetwork.org. Let's go to the phones. Al in Brooklyn, thanks for calling The Line of Fire.
Hi, Dr. Brown. I've
Hello.
known you for many years, but this is the first time I'm talking to you. I'm also a pastor, a Messianic Jewish Christian for over 60 years. I just hit my 83rd birthday. But anyway,
wow.
In today's New York Daily News, on page 18, there's an article. The headline is Adopt Loss, a Rights Win. This lesbian couple had a son. One of the ladies had a son by regular marriage and was living with them, and they wanted to adopt the son. And what happened was the judge, the surrogate judge in New York State, denied their request. She brought out that they were not actually suitable to adopt a son because only adoptions should be by a man and a woman. Now, I really thought that, you're discussing the subject of same-sex marriage and homosexuality, this, is more than a coincidence that it's in today's New York Daily News. I believe that there are no coincidences. It's only the handiwork of God. And I just wanted to know what you and your guests thought of this, because it seems to be giving another message that in order to adopt someone, you should be a mother and a father.
Yeah, I mean, that was all but common sense until recently. And it's not to say, Al, that there aren't couples, two men or two women, that really care for a child. but that child doesn't have a choice. And when the parent gave that child up for adoption, they were probably hoping that the child would get in a stable home. And ultimately, the best environment for a child is to be connected to biological mom and dad. If that can't happen, to be connected with another mom and dad. And there's a lot of discussion about research and the claims that two men or two women can provide just as good a home and be just as good parents, that it has no negative effect on the kids being raised. What do you understand about research regarding same-sex parenting?
Well, I've read Mark Regeneris' study and some other studies from abroad that have looked at the family stability situation for same-sex couples, and it's a lot less stable, first of all. Secondly, there's a much higher incidence of potential sexual abuse of children within that setting because of potential of multiple partners is what my guess is, but that wasn't detailed in the studies. So in essence, it is not an adequate comparison between a husband-wife marriage relationship and a same-gender relationship. They're not parallel comparisons. They are two different things. And I think the judge was wise to rule in that favor. I don't know that it will stand. We'll see in this current culture what's going to happen because we've been losing our bearings for some time now. But I hope so. And I think it makes sense that though people may love the child and want to bring them in there, there are some structural deficiencies about missing one of the genders, not being present, and not having the same stability in relationship that otherwise would be there.
Yeah, and even, thanks, Al, for the call, even the question of sexual models, romantic models, how a man treats a woman a man, etc., those things are going to be lacking. Let's go to April in Queens, New York. We're a little short on time, April, but let's at least get started with your question or your story.
Oh, well, I just wanted to say I really thank God for this show. I, too, used to be in homosexuality, and God delivered me completely. And, what Anna's saying is so true. I always say that people, we're sexual creatures, and the thing is that a lot of times people experience ungodly touches, so if somebody touches you in a wrong way, your body part doesn't say, oh, well, this is the same sex, turn off. I've spoke to so many young people who struggle with stuff like this, and, just encouraging them. It's all about the identity of Jesus Christ, because every other identity is false, and I'm just giving honor and thanks to God. People that are listening, you can be free. You don't have to live with, those desires. Jesus didn't just die for our sins. He died so that we could walk in freedom.
Yeah, he did, April, and I appreciate you calling that. That's the ultimate issue. I have a book coming out in May called Can You Be Gay and Christian? And I emphasize a lot the issue of where we put our identity. My guest, Ann Paulk, could speak to that even more, and she will in the next half hour. If my primary identity is I'm attracted to the same sex or the opposite sex, I am romantically desiring this, I'm sexually desiring this, and that's my primary identity, it's going to be tough to do the right thing. If my primary identity is I'm a man or a woman in Jesus, and Jesus is the center of my life, everything changes around that. Friends, visit restoredhopenetwork.org. Check out the resources there. And we're offering today my book, A Queer Thing Happened to America. 700 pages, meticulously documented, deals with all of the transformation that's happened to our culture over this last generation. You'll find it tremendously eye-opening and useful. With postage, it's a $30 value, but yours today, we want to get this out for your gift of any size. Just help us as you're able and call 1-800-278-9978. This is available only by phone today, 1-800-278-9978. One more time, 1-800-278-9978. Back with my guest and your calls.
It's The Line of Fire with your host, activist, author, international speaker, and theologian, Dr. Michael Brown. your voice of moral, cultural, and spiritual revolution. Get into the line of fire now by calling 866-34-TRUTH. Here again is Dr. Michael Brown.
What about those people who started out gay and say they became straight by discovering God? What about ex-gay ministries?
Even so-called ex-gay ministries don't claim to change a person's inner sexual desires, just his or her sexual conduct.
Yeah, that's the claim from the DVD video for The Bible Tells Me So. It's a real hit piece against the idea that people can change, and really tries to play at your emotions to say the only right thing for Christians to do is embrace homosexuality and recognize that that is the way God made certain people. My guest, Ann Paulk, has a deep personal testimony to the opposite of that, and she now leads Restored Hope Network. And it's such an interesting thing that a person may go through the rejection and pain of declaring they're gay, coming out, losing friends and family. Now society celebrates them. Look at what you did. Celebrates you as an athlete coming out. How wonderful. The president calls you to commend you. And then if you say, this is not really who I am, or I know it doesn't please God to live like this, and I want to see change, you're hated and vilified for it. At a certain level, ex-gays are the ultimate victims of our society. I mean, in Jesus, we're whole. Those that would identify as ex-gay are whole and blessed. All of us, whatever we come out of in Jesus, are whole and blessed. But tell us what it's like, the extra level of opposition that you get for simply saying, I used to live a lesbian lifestyle, and I don't anymore.
Well, there is another level of there. Absolutely. The culture does not respect it. In fact, people disbelieve you. They essentially, the gay activists anyway that I've come up with on NPR radio, I remember her going at me and saying, well, you never were gay, or you have never changed. I thought to myself, well, goodness, make one case or the other. You can't make them both at the same time.
Right.
For goodness sake. And so I answered back to her, and I thought, why is it so threatening to believe that people like me exist? It's threatening. It's terribly and tremendously threatening. Why? Because, well, they might be culpable. They might be responsible for their sexual choices in that case. And so our culture is embracing, the more it embraces hedonistic sexuality of anything goes, and genderless sex and whatever else that they're going through, and the newest and the brightest of the moment, honestly, the less they're going to be respecting God's design of sexuality. And definitely those who leave behind the old ways to embrace God's design of sexuality, it really goes in the opposite flow. And so most of my life I have lived as a fish going upstream, not only as being a Christian in a non-Christian world, but being someone who's left behind what the world celebrates right now, which is homosexuality and any variation therein. So it's all right. I'm used to it. I'm following the Lord, and it really doesn't matter what they think about me. But what it does matter is what Jesus thinks about me and what my Father in heaven thinks about me. And I am respected amongst my friends and co-laborers in Christ and my neighbors and my, it's what the rest of the world out there thinks about me. They're going to have to denigrate what they hear, because otherwise they've got to deal with some realities that they don't want to deal with.
Right. And you cannot equate homosexuality with skin color. You cannot say gay is the new black if change is possible. If you're not born that way and you cannot change, then you can't equate it with skin color, and therefore it is challenging and undermining. The bigger issue, though, is what does God require? What does he ask of us? All right, we come back. I want to get to your calls. I want to ask Ann some difficult questions because she and her husband became the poster couple for change, and her husband John has gone through some challenges, and activists on the other side like to mock us because of that.
God of light, hear our cry, send the fire.
It's The Line of Fire with your host, Dr. Michael Brown, your voice of moral, cultural, and spiritual revolution. Here again is Dr. Michael Brown.
If these places really work, why don't they all use the same technique? Why does each ministry experiment its own way? And why have so many members and leaders recanted earlier claims that they were changed?
We'll hear that. Listen, the leader of this ministry, the leader of that ministry said they were lying to themselves. They never really changed, or no one really changes, or I'm going back to the way I used to live. Doesn't that prove that no one changes? There are a lot of obstacles to overcome, a lot of challenges to deal with, and the media and society at large is programmed to think right now that change is impossible. My guest Dan Paulk and many, many others stand up and say, no, in Jesus all things are possible. And even those who are not believers have found effective counseling and therapy. When I say therapy, I mean counseling, in getting an understanding of the root of some of their issues, and out of that, change coming to their lives in terms of their attractions and desires. 866-34-TRUTH. We are going to get to some more calls in a moment. So, Ann, again, it's one thing to just follow Jesus in this culture and then raise a family and have the pressures of life with that. It's another thing now to be known for your testimony of coming out of a lesbian lifestyle, and then to be married to a man who became the poster boy for change, was working with focus on the family. There was an incident in a gay bar. Suddenly his whole testimony is challenged, and what was he doing in there, and so on. And then it seemed out of the ministry spotlight, just living a married life as a husband and father. I contacted him when I was writing A Queer Thing Happened to America to ask him how things were going in his life, and he said, great, just celebrated whatever anniversary he was and excited about raising his kids. And then in the last year, John seems to have gone in another direction. I don't want to focus on this, but you did say that we could address it briefly when we asked you before the broadcast. How is he doing? How can we pray for him? And do you believe that he ever really did experience change?
You know, I think my now ex-husband is a perfect example of people do have the free will to decide what they want to do with their attractions. If they want to skirt the edge of those attractions, if they want to invest in those attractions, they can develop them. They can go that direction. I think the example of Passport to Purity from I cannot remember his name, Family Life Today, puts that on. It's a great tool for talking with teens about sexuality. If you are skirting the edge of something, if you're looking over the cliff, you may fall off, or you may jump off, for that matter. And the cliff of sin is not a good place to hang out. And a person can make that choice, and another person can choose not to be over there, constantly looking over the edge of the cliff of sin. And that was my choice. I chose not to do that, not to invest in that way, and I have a different outcome as a result of it. He has wandered off and pursuing his former attractions, and that really is the matter of fact that we all have free will, and we have this privilege and scary responsibility to own it, to be the person in charge of our lives and either surrender our sexuality to Christ or not do so. And
now, Ann, when people will challenge things because of this, I mean, of course, be praying for Ann, be praying for John, and be praying for their 3 boys. But if people say, look, obviously there was never change, you guys never had a normal marriage and family, does that bother you when you hear those things?
Well, I haven't heard them a whole lot lately directly, but I don't go looking for them either online. But I'm sure that they would make that claim, and they're wrong. They're wrong. We got married because we were attracted to each other, because we lined up our lives together, and we had a very normal marriage. What went wrong? Well, I think probably for anybody who has unresolved things in their lives, or if they choose certain patterns of behavior, you can nurture sin. And I think, and I'm just generalizing this, but I think anybody can do that. And so, does a marriage who starts off right end up going off somewhere, yes, that can happen. That's unfortunately a sad reality of this world, and it's a tragedy. It's a loss, and it's not something that can just be undone. There's no other person to fill in the gap, or there's a loss. It's a very real loss, losing my husband and losing a father in the home and a godly man. But over time, things had deteriorated for him. His understanding is going a different direction, and he wasn't always thinking along the lines that he is now. That was not who he was 10, 15 years ago, or even 20 years ago. So people, there's the sad reality that we can indeed choose to go a different way, go the easiest way, or whatever, and that's too bad.
And how old are your boys now, Ann?
My youngest is 11, and I have a 14-year-old and a 17-year-old, and they're all boys.
All right, and we want to be just praying for the fullness of the blessing on the Paulk family, and for John, like anyone else that was walking with the Lord that is not, that God would grant him repentance, and that the Lord would fill the gaps and the needs within the family right now, and be especially gracious to Ann. What is encouraging to me to see is your tenacity to keep moving forward, to lead Restored Hope Network, and to help others struggling. Look, in every area of ministry, I do a tremendous amount of Jewish ministry, and sometimes you'll deal with someone who knew the Lord that turns away from the Lord and reverts to traditional Judaism. Or you'll see a couple, heterosexual couple, happily married, then over a period of years, the relationship deteriorates, and one person abandons the other and commits adultery, and that doesn't disprove the reality of what God did in someone's life, and it doesn't prove doctrine. It proves that human beings can be frail and can make wrong choices. Again, we're not saying that someone just grows up and chooses same-sex attraction. We are saying that we choose what we act on or don't. Let's go back to the phones. Stephanie in Baltimore, thanks for calling the Line of Fire.
Hi, Dr. Brown. I was calling because I have a friend that I recently connected with. We grew up as teenagers together in church, and I just recently connected with him, and he was heterosexual at that time, and now he's openly gay. I've been sharing the gospel with him. He still identifies completely as a Christian. But one thing he said he wants me to keep sending him resources and, talking to him about all this stuff, but he does not want to be tolerated or asked to change or anything like that. So I don't want to, and he doesn't want to be lied to. So I don't know how to be loving to him without pandering and truthful without being considered hurtful. And I don't want to hide my stance on everything, but at the same time, I don't want to try to force it on him. And I just don't know how to balance it, especially being that he was never identifying as a homosexual growing up. So he's not saying that he was born this way or anything, but it is for him something that he is engaging in at this time.
That's a really tough spot your friend has put you in. Tell me the truth, but don't tell me the truth. And, so what do you do? And if you tell the truth, then you're not being loving. And, okay. Well, so that is an impossible place to be put because one must be both truthful and loving. And you can accomplish much. If you aren't telling the truth, then you're not really being loving, you see. If I don't tell somebody that, constantly doing something that has cancer-producing product and you're seeing them ingest it every day, I'm not very loving if I don't say, hey, did you know? So at least they can make a choice. So along the same lines of logic, not along the same lines of product, along the same lines of logic, if he really wants to grasp what God's will is for his life, then he needs to understand God's commands of sexual ethics. Those things it's just a natural. And it doesn't mean he'll like what he hears, because it doesn't go along with the grain of where he's going with his life right now. But the most loving thing you can do is say, you know what, this is outside of God's plan, but that doesn't mean that Christ can't redeem you and that he wants the best for you, and sin is never the best. And he defines homosexual actions as being sin. Therefore, It's God's definition, not ours, that matters as much.
Yeah, thanks, Ann. And Stephanie, the only other thing that I'd add to that is sometimes it's good to just say, hey, tell me your story, so that you listen and they understand you have a listening ear. And then with complete love, without, you're terrible, you're miserable, how could you be like that? You just, with complete love and without putting the person off, begin to respond and interact. And above all, pray that the Holy Spirit would work in his life. Hey, thank you for the call, Stephanie. And check out resources at restoredhopenetwork.org as well. All right, back with, we'll try to get to one more call and some more questions for Ann before we're done.
It's The Line of Fire with your host, Dr. Michael Brown. Get into the Line of Fire now by calling 866-34-TRUTH. Here again is Dr. Michael Brown.
The American Medical Association, the American Psychiatric Association, the American Psychological Association, the American Psychoanalytic Association, the American Academy of Pediatrics, and the National Association of Social Workers have all stated that homosexuality should not be treated as a mental disorder, and that they oppose attempts at reparative or conversion therapy, and that sexual orientation is not a choice and cannot be changed.
All right. Well, we hear that. That's from The Bible Tells Me So, kind of a hit piece documentary bashing the idea that homosexual practice is sinful in God's eyes and that people can possibly change. My guest, Ann Paulk, Executive Director of Restored Hope Network, says something very different about that. And how do you feel when you hear that, this litany of all of these major medical and scientific organizations that obviously sounds like they know what they're talking about, and they say that no one can change, there's nothing wrong with homosexuality? What's your take, not only your own experience and the experience of hundreds and thousands you've ministered to and ministered with over the years, but your own reading of scientific literature? Is there bias? Is there some type of conspiracy to make our side look bad?
Well, I wouldn't call it a conspiracy, but I would certainly call it a bias. It's interesting to see who has declared this to be true. I mean, if you look at the exact people who have influenced the legislation, you'd find Jack Drescher, you'd find a number of others who are actually gay themselves, who maybe have left families, heterosexual families behind. Some of them, they've abandoned their wife and children to embrace homosexuality, and they are essentially lobbying within the organizations for eliminating the option to leave homosexuality and the fact that people are born gay. Now, I use fact in quotes, if I could say that, because there is no proof that someone is born gay. I've done the research. It mattered to me when I was leaving the lifestyle, and throughout after that. Really, in the beginning, it mattered to me because I wondered, is there any hope for me? I read the Bible, but is there really hope? I mean, does science disprove, and that was a problem for me until I realized that Jesus knows just what to do with sin, and actually calling something sin like homosexuality and homosexual behavior is actually a grace because, tell me, does Jesus know what to do with sin? He knows how to forgive it, redeem us from it, and set us on the right path. I mean, that's what he's all about. He transforms lives. He gives a heart of flesh for a heart of stone. He is the perfect surgeon for the soul. And, the Spirit of God is profound in transforming lives. That's what he does all the time, every day, around the world in different ways. So literature doesn't back up the claims. Their quotes back up their claims, but they don't have anything to base it on. So whenever someone is asked, okay, well, tell me, why do you think that someone's born gay? Where is the proof of this? Even the gay researchers themselves, but predominantly this was done, the research being done was done by gay people trying to prove that people have a genetic component to homosexuality. We're not able to prove a genetic component to homosexuality. Fascinating, but true. And 10 years after the landmark X chromosome study and the brain study, Dr. Dean Hamer, who is gay, declared that there is no gay gene. We haven't found any gay gene. In fact, it doesn't exist. He declared it in the gay magazine The Advocate 10 years after his news came out that there is a gay gene. 10 years later, he said, oh, no, there's no gay gene. And so that's fascinating. Fascinating indeed. Did it make headlines? No, it didn't. Did you hear it on the mainstream news? No, because it wasn't along the bylines of what the news have bought into. They have been sold global warming on sexuality, which is people are born gay. It's a byline. It's not necessarily true at all. In fact, there's no data to back it up. And as far as a Christian view of things, we know a God who transforms lives. So that's a whole different story, isn't it?
It really is.
Doesn't disprove that, does not disprove this.
And you know what I find interesting when you look at the statements of, say, the American Psychiatric Association or American Psychological Association, which former leaders have said is so gay slanted these days and so driven by gay activist mentality and political correctness, they still on their website said we don't really know why someone is same-sex attracted, why someone is homosexual. And it could be nature, could be nurture, could be a combination. We really don't know. So obviously, if there was any possible way to prove it, they would prove it. The fact is it hasn't been proven. But bottom line, the soundbite that Christians need, if someone says I was born gay, well, Jesus says you need to be born again. Bottom line, no matter how deep-rooted things are in people's lives, no matter what struggles they may have with any issue, any desire, we are a broken, fallen race, but there is hope in Jesus. Hey, Ann, just take a few seconds and let folks know what they can find when they go to Restored Hope Network.
Well, thank you, Michael. If you go to Restored Hope Network, you will find a page that opens up with resources above on the menu. Various slides will go by if you want to find help or hope, if you want to read stories about people's lives who have indeed found hope and healing in Christ in the area of gender and sexuality, then click on that. If you'd like to find out more resources, we have at least 40 books that we recommend highly in this topic and varying elements of it, some for women, some for families, some for men. Some are counseling resources, some are testimonial stories. All sorts of varieties therein, including curriculum. If you go to the Find Help tab up on the top and you click on that, Finding Help for Overcoming, you will find that there are 40 tabs, almost 40 pins across the country that represent different ministries, counselors, and pastors who are ready to step in and help and provide hope in Christ, and who can walk alongside of people who are seeking help in dealing with these critical and difficult issues of our day.
And you did say that
also,
there's some also who can provide help by Skype and things like that if there isn't a ministry
online
in the
help.
area.
That's right. Online help. There are other types of help as well as Living Waters groups. If you click over on the right-hand side of the map, it'll show alternate options as well with online support, Taking Back Ground, and Reach Truth. And Living Waters groups are listed there too, which is a wonderful setting for sexual healing and allowing the Lord to come in and minister to the depths of one's soul and open up topics that might be relevant for an individual, that would enable the Holy Spirit to come in and do some healing and profound transformation in that way too.
All right, I've got to jump in. We're out of time, but thank you, Ann, for what you're doing, for your testimony in the Lord, for your encouragement to others. Friends, restoredhopenetwork.org. Visit there. Thanks again for joining us.
Thank you.
All right, friends, today we are offering A Queer Thing Happened to America. Every day that goes by, the book is more essential reading. 700 pages, hardcover, with postage, $35, but yours for your gift of any size. Stand with us, help as you can, and get the book. 1-800-278-9978. By phone only today, 1-800-278-9978. One more time, 1-800-278-9978. My bottom line today, no matter how deep the issues are in your life, we have a Savior who goes deeper still to bring wholeness and freedom.